I liken it a bit to a sort of fire. You've got to have a spark, and then you've got to keep feeding it, but you've got to be careful not to overfeed it. You can also choose, if that is your strategy, to take on graduates or apprentices or technicians. And if you take on those people at the start of their career, you've got one massive advantage. Those people have the lowest salary expectations of anyone. They might want to progress, but they have the lowest salary expectations. So there is an economic reason why that's a good idea. Like anything, failing is really valuable. Failing the exam made me think, there are gaps. And in the UK and Scotland, something like 2 to 3% of heat is delivered by district heating. In Denmark, across Denmark as a whole, that's about 60%. And in Copenhagen, it's up towards 90%. Yeah. There remain continuing challenges that engineering and engineers can help to solve. And at the end of the day, those challenges are worth getting up for.
Paul, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
This is really exciting. I'm excited to share your career and your vision of your field, but also some advice you can give to those aspiring to follow in your footsteps. So let's start where I always do. What sparked your interest in engineering?
Lots of things really, but principally, my grandfather was 76 when I was born, so he was relatively old when he had my father, and I knew him having had a career in engineering, although he was not an engineer when I was growing up with him. He was obviously long retired, but I never really found out what he did. He worked at Lucas Industries. He was a mechanical engineer. I don't know what level of seniority he ever got to, but that was the first thing that made me think I'd just like the idea of being an engineer. And it's interesting because I had no idea what he did. So I was pursuing something that was just a word. My uncle, my dad's brother, and his son was also an engineer, aeronautical engineer, but ended up in Glasgow and working for AG Barr. And so he would come down to visit us. I was growing up on the south coast in Eastbourne. He'd come down and visit us, and he'd always bring a slab of Irn Bru. Irn Bru was not easy to come by in Eastbourne, but I would get a taste for Irn Bru, and he would tell us stories about the work he was doing at AG Barr. A few years after that, I then got an opportunity to work with the team at Barrs, and I got a sort of slight sense of his character from them, and it's fair to say he was sort of He was feared, I think, is probably the right way to put it. I think he was fairly robust in the way he dealt with people, and it was interesting. It's quite a different character, I would say, to the way I think I operate. But anyway, he was very effective, I think, and he did some amazing stuff and used to tell some fascinating stories about the stuff he got onto. Anyway, we could come on to that in due course. I also had another uncle who was retired, who's now a retired professor of laser engineering, and he once took us to his labs in Liverpool, at Liverpool University, and showed us the CO2 laser he had. It took up the space of quite a significant proportion of the lab that he was in, and you imagine lasers now pretty tiny, and the stuff you can do with lasers in terms of manufacturing is evolved dramatically. But he was working in the early days of lasers, working on the sort of concept of using lasers for manufacture, and working with research students who are largely sort of creatives, artists, but he was very much on the engineering side of that. So he was trying to work out how to manufacture lasers to do stuff like that. And he kindly took us around the lab, and that was an amazing experience. Then, having decided I wanted to be an engineer, when I was about 15, I had the opportunity to do a work experience. So they were building a big harbour in Eastbourne, the Sovereign Harbour. It's now, 30 years old. And during the construction, Tarmac took me on as a 1-week work experience student, and I did some calcs for them to work out how much water went into and out of the harbour over a tidal cycle, and I think it was probably the job that everyone got to do. Yeah. And whether my calculation was right or wrong probably didn't matter. But the fundamental point was I got to see what was going on, and I got to understand. I got to walk around the site, and I got to experience the sort of scale of an engineering project like that, with huge lock gates that they were building to impound the water in the harbour, and the scale of excavation and sort of civil engineering and management of something like that was phenomenal. And then I saw it evolve over time, because obviously we lived in Eastbourne. We saw the development that emerged around it, the sort of social and economic impact of that development that was significant. And it really sort of triggered in me that idea that infrastructure has a very fundamental role in society, in the economy, and in how things work. So yeah, that sort of emboldened my enthusiasm. I likened it to a bit to a sort of fire. You've got to have a spark, and then you've got to keep feeding it. But you've got to be careful not to overfeed it. And I think mum and dad, my mum was a maths teacher. She sort of encouraged a love of maths and science in me, and that was enormously valuable. She could help me and coach me when I was struggling in anything. But I generally just really enjoyed maths and science, so that helped to sort of reinforce that idea of becoming an engineer. And as I say, they never pushed me, but they encouraged me. And they allowed me to make my own choices and make my own mistakes. But yeah, that was really valuable. And then after the summer job, I then decided I was going to go to university. I was going to take a gap year. I always wanted to have that time between school and university, and I started applying for jobs. And I got a job and I can come back to this because there's a whole story around that, which I think I can come on to in due course. But I got a job with a small company called the Butler Puller Partnership, a small geotechnical and environmental consultancy, and that was a year of learning with a job and experiencing the sort of interesting stuff that you had to do in a job. It's not always just about engineering. It's about going and picking up samples and analysing data and going to the pub with colleagues and just generally, there's a wide range of stuff that you don't necessarily see when you're studying that was really valuable to have had that experience before I went to university. So yeah, those are.
That's it. Podcast done.
That was quite a lot there. Yeah. But yes,
no, that's really interesting. I mean, I definitely want to jump into your first job.
Yeah.
But going back to what you were talking about in terms of family, it's obviously nice that it's good that what your exposure and what you were building as through school and through not necessarily university yet, but what you were, I guess, good at was marrying up. And having that exposure, you and I know, is incredibly powerful. Just seeing what engineering is doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go into what you were seeing, but seeing what the impact of it is, and the people involved, the behaviours. So what led you to then university and civil engineering? Was it that exposure? And because obviously you mentioned the first exposure you had was through bar and I'm guessing production lines, etc., manufacturing.
Yeah.
What led you to civil engineering?
Yeah, and that was all sort of from a distance, because it was always talked about rather than actually sort of seen in the flesh. I suppose the opportunity to go to Tarmac and work on the harbour was that was a major civil engineering project that sparked it's probably the sort of first seed that said civil engineering. And then I'm a fairly impetuous person, so once I decided civil engineering was the thing I was going to do, I became fairly fixated on it. It was engineering, and then it was civil engineering, and then it became a sort of a focus and a fixation. I mean, I'm not a civil engineer really now by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, I haven't designed a foundation or a retaining structure for a very long time. But I wanted to do civil engineering, and really, as I say, it was that sort of feeding the fueling the fire. The work experience, and then the gap year job again in civil engineering, and getting the job required me to engage with the institution of civil engineers, and so I got an introduction to the institution then, and by that point I guess it had become a focus whilst I had a huge degree of flexibility as well, because my university course was a general engineering course. So the first 2 years I covered every subject from fluid mechanics, structures, civils, electrical engineering, computing, software. I mean, we did pretty much a bit of everything. Yeah. So I still had in that 2 year period at university, I could have chosen a different route, but I remained fairly fixated on what I wanted to do, and did the second 2 years of that degree, focusing on civil and geotechnical engineering.
Yeah, my degree was, I've said this so many times, I think with my degree there was a kind of general engineering first 2 years, and my first class was fundamentals of electrical and electronic engineering, and I think within an hour of being at university I knew why I'd picked mechanical engineering. So
yes. I think civil and mechanical engineers probably look at electrical engineering as the thing that doesn't make it doesn't seem as straightforward.
No, exactly. Kind of less tangible and visual nature, but then I guess maybe electrical engineers would argue otherwise. But I'm going to jump straight into things. I think it's fascinating that you went to university and you studied civil engineering at the back end of it. You got your degree. You're starting to get an association with the Institute of Civil Engineers. I don't want to say but your first role, but your role as a computer-aided design technician doing CAD. Today that maybe isn't something that people would think. You go to university, incredibly good university as well, reputable university as Cambridge, but then to come out as a CAD technician, that is a great first step, because like you said, you've learnt the work environment almost straight away. You're doing a role which is hands-on, you're understanding engineering drawings, etc. Can you tell me a bit about that role and what the kind of foundations that it created for you?
Well, so the CAD technician role was actually the gap year job. That was the gap year job. So that was pre-university, but it was. I mean, it was so fundamental because drawing is critical to and understanding digital design tools was becoming and emerging as a critical thing that you had to understand. So I was working in AutoCAD 12. So this was 95 to 96, and I spent a year basically drawing site layouts, marking borehole locations, marking out plans. So the engineers would give me a hand sketched drawing of a site or a cross section of a trial pit or something that they had done that they needed turned into a CAD drawing, and I would do that work to turn it into a CAD drawing. But CAD became and continues to be such a crucial part and has evolved over time into 3D tools, 3D rendering. The work that CAD technicians and our draftsmen, the role they're playing in projects now is crucial because they are the means of communicating the information that the engineers are delivering, and no one wants to see an engineer's calculations. What they want to see is what is my building going to look like? Yeah. What is the component that you're going to create for me? What does it look like? How does it move? How does it work? What am I going to get at the end of this?
Yeah, exactly.
And how do I integrate that into the wider system? Whether that's, as I say, a very small component in a mechanical piece of equipment, or how does it fit? How does this building fit into the landscape that it's being put into? And how does the engineering solution work to deliver the architect's vision in the building that's being built? But CAD is crucial to all that. I mean, I have to say I couldn't do it again now. I mean, it's slightly the technology has moved on. I could draw in AutoCAD 12 if anyone asked me to.
Listen, I might have a copy of that. Can't remember what my dad says. My dad's as a draftsman, he leads a team. BIM is his thing. Yeah. Every iteration of AutoCAD over the years is like it's like the big release in my house almost. Right. It's like the new iPhone coming out almost. My parents' house, should I say? But so sticking with you then. So then once you leave, then talk me through like the kind of first couple of roles, because I want to get into the institution of civil engineers as well, and the importance of being part of an institution, because it's been critical to your career as you've built through time. But what would you class then as your kind of first role after leaving university that you began to kind of build from?
Yeah, so I had summer jobs every year when I was at university, and had really interesting opportunities. So 3 summers with 3 different companies. So that was valuable. But that was equivalent to the sort of work experience. It was developing my experience of work, and frankly, it was sustaining me through university. And so then I got a job at a company called Whitby Bird and Partners, I think they were called at the time, ultimately working for a guy called Mark Whitby. And Mark was massively influential to me during my time. When I was working there for the first 7 years of my career. I joined Whitby Bird as a graduate civil engineer in a really very small civil engineering team, mentored by a guy called Dan Harvey. Dan is now senior in Ramboll, which is the company that acquired Whitby Bird in about 2007. And about 6 months after I started, they won a project for the BBC broadcasting house. In fact, no, probably only 3 months after I started. And they employed another geotechnical engineer called Mohsen Vaziri. And Mohsen became then my boss from, as I say, about 3 or 4 months into my work. I said to them, I'd love to be involved in more geotechnical engineering because that's what my course was at university. Whitby Bird had generally outsourced that in the past, but when they won this BBC project, which was a huge development in the city centre of London, building a deep basement and a large building over the Victoria Line, all sorts of fascinating engineering challenges associated with it, and they brought me into that team, and it was the team of 2 of us at the very start, and it very quickly grew to a team of 10 or so people, winning lots of other bits of work with the structural engineers in Whitby Bird, but providing a sort of specialist geotechnical service within the organisation. And as I say, Mohsen was a real kind of and remains a real sort of vanguard of the geotechnical sector. Yeah. And he just quietly gets on with stuff. He's very likeable, very easy to work with, great manager, gently encourages people, gives them space to sort of develop and develop their own career and their own where they want to go. Supported me as in 2007 when I chose to leave London and move up to Scotland, and he enabled that to happen, allowed me to move up, started the team in Scotland, and then we had financial crisis, challenging times. I diversified the team into energy, and that's where I started to. And at the same time, Ramboll had acquired Whitby Bird, yeah. And I moved across into energy. But I quite like to. There's another. I mean, my story is about a lot of it's about people. So Mark and Mohsen and Dan, really influential, important people in sort of developing me, but also giving me and all the people around them the space to learn, grow, and develop. And Mark now has another company that he set up with another one of my peers, called Whitby Wood. Whitby Wood is a structural engineering firm in London now, and they are again developing a whole host of new talent in London.
Can I jump down that there then? Because I think that there's a lot of students that listen to this, a lot of graduates listen to it, but there is a lot of people who listen to the podcast who are in the industry, who actively are trying to and wanting to and keen to support people into it. What about those? What that you mentioned the names there of those who have ultimately kind of mentored role models to you. What do you think they did that has left this lasting impression on them, and what do you think people could learn from people like that? Because I think it's funny, I put a poll out this morning and it was, ultimately asking what was the critical factor at the start of your career, and the number one thing that's been voted for is someone backed me. Yeah. And I could list all the people that backed me in my career. Tell me what the kind of credentials of those people.
I think they created spaces. They created places where early career professionals could come into those roles and develop. And you don't have to create roles for graduates. I mean, it is you can run a perfectly successful business by employing experienced people and getting them to do the job and deliver the outcomes and the services and the outputs that are required from a engineer. And this is in the consultancy space. But you can also choose, if that is your strategy, to take on graduates or apprentices or technicians. And if you take on those people at the start of their career, you've got one massive advantage. Those people are the have the lowest salary expectations of anyone. They might want to progress, but they have the lowest salary expectations. So there is an economic reason why that's a good idea, and it's an economically good, sensible thing to do, because those people are also smart, efficient, and keen to learn, and overwhelmingly enthusiastic. I mean, I think I couldn't even think of people who have not been enthusiastic about when they've got their first job, and so they may not be the leaders in their field, but if you put them in a place where there are leaders in their field who are willing to allow those young people to develop, and who will nurture them and support them and allow them to fail, but support them and back them if they do fail, and then hopefully catch them before they fall too far, and make sure that the client gets what the client wants, but those young people then become really valuable assets. They will stay, and they will continue to be advocates of those businesses, and they will develop into the leaders of the future and the senior people that will make differences in the future. So at Whitby Bird they took on. The numbers increased over time, but a large number of graduates, and the process for recruitment of graduates was largely led by the existing graduate cohort in the business, and it was a really brilliant way of encouraging the young people coming in who are at university and have got lots of choice and don't know quite exactly where they want to go. They go into a sort of evening interview / kind of social experience. They meet. We used to the way it was run. We used to meet everyone in the building. They would get a tour of the building. They would then have a sort of social drinks with the existing graduates. They would have a short informal interview with one of the managers, and then on the same night, all of those who had been doing the interviewing, i.e. The existing graduates, the managers, and the senior leadership team of the company, of which the senior leadership team would be there for that process, would sit down and go through everyone who had come along, and they'd work out who was going to be offered a job and who wouldn't be, and it was all done in one night. It was highly effective, extremely engaging. Everyone enjoyed it. Everyone, including the interviewers, left having enjoyed the experience, and hopefully the interviewees enjoyed the experience. Some were offered a job, some weren't, but as I say, overwhelmingly, everyone would say that was a really great way of bringing young people into an organisation. And then when they arrived, they were supported, nurtured, developed, and very quickly given space and independence to take on pieces of work themselves. Yeah. So that was fantastic. And I'd like to also go back to my gap year job, because there was a guy there, the person who recruited me, Fred Butler. Fred was, it turned out, I mean, I only learnt this 3 or 4 years in post university in my career. Fred had written a pretty seminal and important paper on the standard penetration test, which for the uninitiated is a fairly simple test that you use to test soil by effectively banging a spike into the ground and counting the number of times you have to hit it with a standard weight over a standard fall height. And it gave you an indication of the strength of the soil. And he had done the work with another person to develop a paper that explained how you converted the SPT test into a sort of more formal engineering soil strength characterization. And that paper, as a geotechnical engineer, you used it pretty much every project you worked on. In fact, yes, you used it on every project you worked on. But I had known Fred as the guy who employed me in my first job, and Fred was extremely likable. He was one of 2 people who responded to my well over 100 letters applying for jobs in my gap year with a positive response. I got about 6 replies, 4 gentle rejections, 2 replies that said, "Come along, we'll interview you and see if you're a fit for us." I can't remember who the other one was, because Fred invited me up to Sevenoaks. I met him. He offered me a job, and impetuous as I am, I never looked back, and I took that opportunity, and it was brilliant. At the time, I mean, I was pretty sanguine about the fact that I wasn't expecting to get many replies. And so when I only got 6 responses to well over 100 letters, it was no great surprise to me that was the case, and I don't think I was particularly disappointed or by that. But it was just, it was the way it was.
It's not changed.
It's not changed. but that's fine. I mean, because there's a lot of people applying. So, but I think what it does teach me, I guess the lesson for anyone who's applying now is, I mean, don't be surprised. It's not that people are being rude. It's just that they're busy. There's a lot going on, and those that are looking will respond, and those that are interested will respond. And actually, there's no value in having a rejection. I mean, if they can give you some useful feedback, then great. But otherwise, it's in a way, nothing is. It's not something to be too despondent by. Anyway, so Fred was always available during the course of that year to advise, to talk to. He'd pop by I had a little sort of cubbyhole office for the CAD technician, and he'd come by and just check in on me regularly, and we'd have catch ups. But sadly, he passed away towards the end of the year when I was working with them, and the company then closed down. But he had, I mean, as I say, he had been such a sort of critical player in my role. I think it's important to sort of recognise that, and in many people's experience. Careers, because he took on 3 sandwich year students from Surrey University every year. So alongside me as a gap year work experience person, there were 3 university students who were on the sandwich course. And again, as I could attest to afterwards, trying to get summer work or a sandwich year job is hard. So he was taking 3 people on every year. And as I said earlier on, there's an economic reason for that. He needed people who could do a job for him, and they were the right type of people. They were enthusiastic, they were capable, but they were also, let's use the right word, cheap. I mean, it didn't cost him a lot of money to employ those people, but they did what he needed to do. They got experience out of it. The client got what they needed. They were supervised by senior people who could ensure that what they were doing was right and was checked properly. And therefore, I think it was a no-brainer. Yeah. And I would encourage anyone who employs people to really think hard about whether they could create a program, and I think a program is important, a program of bringing in young people, 1 or more if you can, young people every year, because they change the culture in the organisation.
That's exactly it. No, I completely agree. I mean, I'm just sitting listening to this. This is fantastic hearing this, because obviously you're seeing this from a very different perspective from me. You're a lot of experience, and you've seen the benefits of it. I mean, I've felt the benefits and seen the benefits, but I've had a very short career compared to the experience you've covered. So it's invaluable hearing this from you. But let's go into your beloved area of energy, and you mentioned it in terms of the financial crisis and how that kind of pivoted both your position at the time within Ramboll. So within energy, and then in particular heat, how did your career begin to then evolve through that, and then obviously as you've kind of moved role into Vattenfall and then where you are today? Yeah.
So Whitby Bird was predominantly buildings, built environment, structure engineering. When they were acquired by Ramboll, that in 2007, that was an opportunity to look at all the other things that Ramboll did across a wide range of other sectors, and one of them was energy. And because I'd moved to Scotland in 2007, around the time of that merger, the opportunity to work with the energy group emerged, and initially I was looking at wind farms. I was, as a civil and geotechnical engineer, wind farms were an obvious place to go, but it was quite a crowded market. So I won a few bits of work, and we did some foundation work for some wind farms, and I started to get to know the energy team. And then I met a couple of people who were working on the project in Edinburgh, which was around something called district heating. District heating at the time I was somewhat sceptical of. It was distributing hot water in underground pipes and centralising the generation asset and delivering heat to individual homes through, as I say, these underground insulated pipes. And it struck me as a sort of, it didn't feel like it was 21st century. It didn't feel like it was very efficient, but it took me a while to come around to the idea that it was a good idea. But as I say, they had a project in Edinburgh out at Craig Miller for two tower blocks that the council were looking to refurbish and put in a communal heating system. And so Ramboll were advising the council on the solutions that they could choose, and a wider master plan for district heating across the development area around those two blocks of flats. So I didn't really get involved in the project directly, except that they would come across and have meetings, and I would sort of join them in some of those conversations. But the thing that changed it for me was when the Climate Change Act in 2009 started to look at the route to decarbonisation of energy. Heat was and remains a sort of secondary element of a secondary priority for how do we decarbonise it. It has and continues to be a priority around electrification and decarbonisation of the electricity system and the grid. But heat networks did start to emerge as an idea, and a few projects started to come out of that were publicly funded, led by local authorities, looking at early stages of heat mapping and feasibility studies. And so I started to work with my Danish colleagues a lot more on those projects, and we started to win a few things. And then Scottish Government let a contract to develop the Scotland heat map, and we bid it. We bid it with me as the project manager, with one of our GIS specialists as the lead GIS specialist in the project, and developed ultimately we developed a very large SQL database for Scotland's heat, with well over 2.2 million data points for every building, and a heat demand for every building, and a whole lot of background engineering required to kind of gather data, assess that data, and turn it into a useful database that could be used to map and assess the probability and priority of heat networks across Scotland. And that heat map that we delivered in about 2013-14 is now retained and maintained by Scottish Government. We handed over all of the databases, the database update methodologies and guidance, and it's now managed by Scottish Government, and they update it on an annual basis using the tools that were created by the team, and I have to say by the team, not me, that allows them to keep that live. But that is the basis of the local heat and energy efficiency strategies that have been developed, all of the heat mapping that's been done, and it was a crucial tool, both for me on my journey, but also for the sector. And so I got, having been a total skeptic of heat networks, I am now a total advocate, and that's pretty much the only thing I do now. And I left Ramboll in 2021. and went to go and work for an organisation called Vattenfall, which is a Swedish state-owned energy company. I worked for them for 5 years, and I left them in January this year to set up on my own to be an independent consultant with a focus on heat networks, and particularly focusing on the nexus between public and private coordination, control, and management of heat networks. And so, having started my career as a geotechnical engineer, moving into an energy space and working on heat networks, where I became more of a project manager and ultimately as a business manager, running a team of people, where I relied on those people and their mechanical and electrical expertise, and I could, I'm not bad at it. I understand the broad principles, but I certainly couldn't design a solution for anyone. I'm now looking much more to work in the sort of business operation, business management space, and support the establishment and growth of heat network companies that can deliver social infrastructure, which district heating is, to a greater proportion of the population than currently are connected to these systems.
Yeah, and during that kind of realisation of the benefit, or what you see as the benefits of the district heating, what case studies were you looking at across Europe? Was there case studies in Europe you were looking at to see the benefits of it? Because my understanding is that district heating is used more so in Europe than it is, well, certainly here anyway.
Yeah. So in the UK and Scotland, something like 2 to 3% of heat is delivered by district heating. In Denmark, across Denmark as a whole, that's about 60%, and in Copenhagen it's up towards 90%. Yeah. So a lot of the case studies I was looking at, because Ramboll's Danish, and that was where I spent some of my time. A lot of the case studies I was looking at were Danish, but when I moved to Vattenfall, they had networks in Hamburg, Berlin. They divested those two to federal government in Germany, and then they also had networks in Amsterdam and across the Netherlands. So there are a wide range of examples of heat networks. The technology is well established; it's been around for a very long time. The commercial structures and the way heat network companies operate and how they are owned and managed differs country to country. And in the UK, the early networks were generally owned by municipalities or local authorities. And in the recent years, given public sector finance, the expectation has been much more on private ownership. But that private ownership model is, it's a hard model to make work. I mean, the returns on a heat network are long, slow, and at the outset risky. Once they're established, and once you've got customers contracted to take heat, then they become much more stable. But in the early days, which we are in now, they're really not a particularly appealing prospect for private finance institutions who can frankly put their money elsewhere with a less risk and a better return. So I mean that's where, as I say, that's where I'm now working, is at that nexus between, we've got some public sector led heat networks that are working, we've got some private sector led heat networks working, we've got some joint ventures that are working really well, but what's the right model today to establish new networks? And then in the future, once those networks become established and have grown, is the model that starts them off the right model and the same model that needs to continue? I would argue probably not. I would argue that as you grow the network, the risk reduces. As you gain more contracts and more contracted revenue, you can improve the risk balance in the system, and you can change the ownership model. But we're at the emergence of these systems, and we need to recognise that we're at the emergence of those systems, and we need to try and find a way of getting more of them, because heat networks are, in my view, and I don't think I'm wrong, is they're a necessity. We've got relatively high density cities where putting individual heat pumps in is going to be difficult. We need to convert from the gas system. Heat networks are the sensible, obvious answer in certain areas, and therefore we need to find a way of delivering them. Yeah. And at the moment, that delivery model is I think is struggling.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to see over the next few years to see how your role, because I'll take it back to the purpose of engineering here. I love, you said, skeptical at first and now almost kind of leading within it. And if that's a lesson to anyone that's in their career thinking, I'm going to work in this area, it's going to be this area. You've pivoted, you've been pushed, you've followed a path, and now ending up where you are is something that anyone can take great inspiration from. So we spoke beforehand very briefly around, and throughout this, around your role within the Institute of Civil Engineers, and also you've been a board director at Scottish Renewables. These are what you would maybe call extracurricular, or additions to what your career is. We all work to earn money so we can facilitate our lifestyles and family, etc. How has, first and foremost, the ICE played a part in your career?
It was, I lived in London. That helped because the institution and the headquarters are in London. That's not to say that there are regional organisations that people that one can join. And be part of the institution. But I happen to, as I say, be in London, and therefore I was able to go to 1 Great George Street to the headquarters. I joined the local region, but the local region generally their activities were in the grand surroundings of 1 Great George Street, and so it was great to be able to go there. And it gave me amazing access to meet with key people in the industry. I met most of the presidents between 2000 and 2007 when I was living in London, and they loved having young graduates, enthusiastic people that they could ask questions of. Give experiences to, take to events, and talk to, have talked to people, and have talked with people about, where they were in their career, what their experiences were, and as I say, gave them amazing access and opportunity to hear from really interesting people and hear about their careers, and most of what the institution that I was involved in were the evening meetings that they ran, and the knowledge sharing that they were doing. And so being part of that and attending those seminars and workshops and evening talks meant that you heard from a wide range of people about a lot of subjects, and these were the leaders in their field. You didn't get to speak at an event at the institution if you weren't doing something really important or working on a project that was fascinating and interesting. And so we had, it was back at the back end of my time at the institution. It was just the start of the process of getting London 2012 going. So you had fascinating talks about that. You had that there were major rail projects going on. Thameslink had been built and tunnelled under London. There's Crossrail was being talked about. The sort of early versions of Crossrail were being talked about, and they were starting to safeguard the routes for Crossrail. And so, as a geotechnical engineer, hearing about that sort of long-term infrastructure planning was fascinating. Back in 2004, 5, 6, we were having to design buildings that were capable of withstanding the changes in stresses and strains in the ground that were going to come from a tunnel that was not there at the moment but was going to be built in the future. And so you had to design your building not only to be able to withstand the sort of current forces of nature, but the forces of nature that were going to be imposed upon it by someone else sticking a tunnel through.
That's really engineering challenge.
I know, and it was fascinating.
Yeah, that is. That's fascinating. And you became chartered as well. What value do you put on, not necessarily chartership, because I think, we know that engineering technician, incorporated engineer, chartered engineer, knowing the engineering competencies alongside the UK spec, it's something I speak a lot with students at the moment. Because if you've not become a student member, of your institution, it's something you're maybe not aware of as much. But what weight do you put on that, both within personally, but also the engineers that you've worked with, in terms of being aware of that the competency framework?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the ability to say you're a chartered engineer gives you credibility and legitimacy. But the process of getting there teaches you a lot that university doesn't teach you, and it asks you to ponder on some topics that you probably don't have the opportunity to experience in work, practically, at the point in your career where you are. So things like leadership and management, you might not be leading and managing people, but you have to consider and look at what does good leadership look like, what does good management look like, and that starts to get you to think about, how am I going to model myself when I, in due course, take on those roles. The Institution of Civil Engineers exam was a written report, a written submission on your experience, a project report on a specific project that you had worked on. Then you were interviewed. In the interview, you were quizzed on anything from the technical aspect to the project management to the risk management. They could ask you pretty much anything on the project, and you had to be able to give a credible answer. And then an essay, and you had to answer one question out of two that were set, and they were on. I think it was about 30 topics that the reviewers could choose from. But as I say, the one that stood out to me that really, and I mean, there were a few that I revised all of them, but there was one in particular that I thought was really interesting, which is the topic was from a manager to a leader, and that was it. That was the topic. They could ask a question around that topic, but the sort of topic was from a manager to a leader, and it just begs some interesting questions.
Yeah, that's interesting.
How does one have a take on that? And I think, it was as I say, I can't remember all the other 30, but that one stood out to me as one that I spent a bit of time thinking about.
Spoke to quite a few civil engineers, and the chartership route's a bit different to the mechanical engineering one. I'm obviously I'm obviously a mechanical engineer, but I was a project manager now. But the chartership was very similar. The reports against competencies, but the interview definitely the hardest I've had, absolutely, out of anything. Yeah. And I came out of it thinking that I've been ripped apart there. But then getting it was probably the best feeling.
Did you pass first time?
I passed first time, but
I didn't.
But it was brutal.
Yeah,
it was brutal.
Yeah. No, I didn't. I failed the first time, and I passed the second time. And actually, it like anything, failing is really valuable.
Oh yeah.
Because failing the exam made me think, there are gaps. There are things I didn't know. I mean, I went for it very quickly. I mean, as I've said twice already, I'm impetuous, I was always going to try and get my my chartered engineering qualification as quickly as I possibly could, which meant that means submit your application within just over 3 years of finishing university. Yes. And honestly, I wasn't ready. I mean, it wasn't the right time for me to do it, and it was right that I failed. And that interview was really hard.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have the competence. I didn't know some of the stuff I needed to know. I wasn't able to respond credibly to the interviewer's questions, and I absolutely deserved to fail. But that meant that the next time I was more prepared. I understood the process. I understood what I had to know, and frankly, the extra year that I had was had taught me an awful lot. Yeah. And it was super helpful to me. And then when I had the real interview, honestly, it was a breeze. It was such a pleasant conversation because whilst they were trying to test me, it didn't feel like, it felt sensible. It felt like it was the right thing, that the questions they were asking were logical, because I could give them a credible and sensible answer.
Yeah.
And it felt so enjoyable to be able to talk about a project I was passionate about.
Yeah.
And obviously I talked about the BBC and the fact that we by then we had done a lot of the excavation, and we were well into having profound impacts on tunnels and
I can imagine
adjacent buildings, and
probably one thing that was going on.
I mean, but as I say, I'd learned a lot in that time. The site, we'd done a lot of the site works. It was the right thing to have the experience, and that, again, it means I believe that I was, because I failed once and passed the second time. I also believe the credibility and legitimacy that the qualification gave me.
I moved job twice to become chartered, so I was chasing the competencies as well. And that was the oil and gas downturn kind of completely impacted on the companies I was at. But yeah, you've got to do what you got to do.
Yes.
And, it's always good to set targets. So this has been fascinating. So it would rude for me not to ask around, what you foresee over the next few years. You've made the jump to kickstarting your own consultancy. What do you envisage? What do you envisage the next couple of years looking like?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't really want, in an ideal world, I don't want the consultancy to be the sort of the thing I do for the rest of my career. I want the consultancy to work with, and in particular, my client base is public sector, local authorities, public bodies with large buildings who are looking to connect to heat networks, and to some extent working with the private sector, but principally around helping them to understand how to work with those public sector organisations. Most of the projects I've done have been working for public institutions in one way, shape or form in the heat network sector, or in joint ventures with private companies. And so I want to work in that space. And what I would love to do is to progress that the development of those projects and those institutions to a place where there is the concept of regional energy companies for heat start to emerge. Yeah. And then I would like to find a role in one of those regional energy companies, or even, I mean, if you take that to a scale, national energy companies. I mean, there's no reason why regional can't become national.
Yeah.
Because fundamentally in heat networks, the one thing that we're doing at the moment is we're duplicating a lot of important knowledge and experience. We're repeating lessons that don't necessarily need to be repeated, because we've got 32 authorities in Scotland. Each one of them is charged with preparing a strategy. Each one of them is then charged with developing a delivery plan for that strategy. It doesn't seem necessary to me that we need to have 32 separate delivery organisations for heat networks across Scotland. There must be a way of coordinating those. And so if I can find a role in those, then that would be my ideal place, and I would happily do that till I retire, and then possibly go back to consultancy once I retire. So that would be my that's my ideal. Yeah. That's my ideal. But the consultancy, it sustains me for the moment, and it keeps me going. And if it has to continue for longer, then it can, and hopefully it will, because it's really enjoyable. I really enjoy the sort of the opportunity to meet people, the conversations I have, and the ability to sort of to try and influence as a consultant, but you're only ever having influence. Yeah,
exactly. Well, as I always say, and I've said since I started engineering career, find your passion, you find your purpose, and it sounds like you have. Yeah. This has been fascinating. So before I go into our final question, I'm going to ask you, if you're speaking to a student right now or a graduate, they're at the start of their career, what bit of advice would you give to them?
So, I'm glad you gave me these questions beforehand, because it's helped me to sort of think through these things. But I mean, I pondered this one for a while. But I think that the key bit of advice I would say is stick to your principles, and don't be afraid to constantly reevaluate those principles, and persevere and create your own opportunities. So if you've got a set of principles and you're willing to persevere towards those to what you believe is the right thing to do, but you're willing to reevaluate that those principles, because those principles are not just going to be about beliefs. They're going to have to include a degree of economic and financial reality. And if you're pursuing something that is a pure belief that has no sustainable economic future for you as an individual, then you're going to have to pivot and find something else. So as I say, stick to your principles, but those should be very much beliefs and values based, but do give it a sense check that those make sense, that they will sustain you in the lifestyle that you want to live.
Yeah.
And then, as I say, persevere and stick to those, because I think it's certainly in my career and in my experience, I might not always be exactly on the right path and right, but I'm not a million miles away from something sensible, and you can be way more credible if you're following your own values and beliefs than if you're trying to pretend to be someone else and trying to pretend to be doing something else that you don't necessarily believe in. So yeah, I think that would be my advice. That might be that feels a bit ethereal, but
I think it's not uncommon to what other leaders have shared in different ways. But I think it's really important, because you've already said it. I was going to, naturally I would ask after that, what advice would you give to organisations? But you've gave it already in terms of that advice to kind of harness programmes and opportunities for young people, or for, I would say young people, but there's career changers out there as well.
Yes.
But that's. Get my approval. Yes. So, listen, thank you so much, Paul, for coming on the podcast. It's been brilliant getting to share. I mean, I think there's so much there, and I'm excited to see how the future builds for you. Yeah, finally, what keeps you passionate about engineering?
I think there are always new challenges. There are always new solutions that need to be found to challenges that will emerge over time, and many of those are challenges that humanity will create for itself, and will need solutions that are engineered. And there's relatively little at the moment that I think that AI can do to solve those without the help of engineers and people who can actually direct those tools to support them. So yeah, at the end of the day, there remain continuing challenges that engineering and engineers can help to solve. And at the end of the day, those challenges are worth getting up for. And it's exciting. It's a challenge. There are also lots of the wider opportunities, the wider needs around communicating engineering solutions it requires different ways of telling stories, articulating what those engineering solutions need. So how will they bring value to the communities and societies that they serve? That is also another aspect that is really important and exciting.
Brilliant, Paul. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and all the best for the future.
Thank you very much. Cheers.